Hey friends, this is Joseph Maynor. So what I want to do in this video is I want to do a video on absolute wisdom for spiritual enlightenment that is entirely my creation. And this is actually one of the most difficult videos I've ever tried to make. I made this video earlier today. I wasn't happy with it, so I didn't publish it. I've actually tried to make it a few other times today too. I've spent all day trying to make this video. And the reason why it's so difficult is there's nothing higher than absolute wisdom. And for me to create from a finite perspective something that is diplomatic and respectful, like that honors truth, honors love, honors beauty, but even goes beyond those. This is taking everything, every faculty I have to try to do this right. And to try to consciously create a video that actually captures something that is useful not only for me and my quartet of videos that this belongs to, but also has a takeaway for you too that's not wrong or false or something like that, pursuant to your own wisdom. Because all of us have wisdom. And so I think the first thing to say about wisdom is that nobody can really entirely give you wisdom, because it's your consciousness and your feeling and your intuition and your judgment ultimately that is the discerning thing for wisdom. Nobody can replace that for you. Nobody can mind meld with you like, oh yeah, just mind meld with me and I'll give you your wisdom for you. That's a huge mistake, a huge groupthink kind of mistake that people do. So the first thing I think to acknowledge about absolute wisdom is that it comes from within. It comes only from you. And it has something to do with judgment. And it has something to do with being different than absolute truth, absolute love, and absolute beauty. And I want to explain what those are. But also, absolute wisdom is, in a way, kind of a placeholder. I'm creating this almost as a placeholder. You could think of absolute wisdom also being just a narrative or a creation. All of this stuff ultimately is a creation. But I'm just saying that, if you're clinging to it, it's not absolute wisdom. So all I can really do in this video is give you a pointer to absolute wisdom. So I think the first thing to do is to kind of say what absolute wisdom is not. So absolute wisdom is not absolute truth, because we're not talking about what is true or false. It's not absolute love, because we're not talking about what is agreeable or disagreeable. It's not absolute beauty, because we're not talking about what's beautiful or what's ugly. It's more like what is wise versus what is foolish. And the thing is that what is wise and what is foolish comes down to what is associated with. What kind of role you're playing as a finite perspective. And this gets into thinking of yourself as a finite perspective, at least in part. Now, there's going to be people who are going to disagree with me about this. And that's fine. That's part of your wisdom. I encourage you to disagree with me. So one of the most important things for me to not do in this video is to basically speak for anybody. I can't. When we're talking about absolute wisdom for spiritual enlightenment, this is one of the most difficult topics to frame, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to be saying this is what absolute wisdom is. But at the same time, I want to create something that points to what absolute wisdom, how I find as a creator that absolute wisdom might be conveyed to you. just as the fourth video in this quartet of videos that I'm making. So the first thing is, so that's what I'm doing. What I'm not doing, again, is I'm not telling you what to think. I'm not telling you what wisdom is. Think of this video as a creation. It's a conscious creation. It's all it can be. And it's been a very difficult video for me to try to make just because of the fact that it is at such a high level. So, one of the things that I want to suggest is that the self is something that we pretend like we're really clear about, but we may not be as clear about as we think we are. So we tend to want to say that the finite self, or the self that you're showing up in the world as space and time, doesn't exist in spiritual enlightenment. It's consciousness that exists, which is the universal self. Some people call this God. Some people call this truth. Some people call this consciousness. And this has to do with spiritual enlightenment, but in my opinion, it has to do more with truth. And I have a video on truth. It doesn't have to do with those things per se, right? It could be any number of things that constitute absolute truth for you. This topic does not mean love, right? It does not mean absolute love. It does not mean relation with a capital R. It does not mean compassion. All those things are a very different kind of thing in spiritual enlightenment and are treated in my video on absolute love. Ditto for absolute beauty, where we're talking about the small self being a character in the world and thinking of yourself, the amalgam self, as a creator in the world. And that's a very fruitful perspective. It's a perspective that I adopt a lot of the time, actually. It's one of my favorite paradigms is to think of myself as a creator. And I do that in a lot of my work. But that doesn't mean that that's the only paradigm that you can be coming from as a character in reality. I mean, look at all the characters in reality. Look at all the things in the world and see all of the different ways that characters and objects can show up in the world, and then realize, oh yeah, like that little finite me is just one finite perspective. Now you may ask yourself, well, why is there a finite perspective? Well, how else would you know what a finite perspective is if there was no finite perspective? You would have no way of knowing what a finite perspective is. So this is why the self, as much as a lot of spiritually enlightened people don't like to admit, it does in part contain a finite perspective, which oftentimes I will gloss as the you or the character that's showing up in space and time in the world. So, the first thing to realize for absolute wisdom is that it's not absolute truth, it's not absolute love, it's not absolute beauty, it's something else, and it's something higher than those. So absolute wisdom is higher than those. And the reason why you can't see that, okay, and again, I'm just creating this, so you can feel free to, as I'm talking, think about all the ways that like you're disagreeing with me too. You don't have enough distance from these things to get outside of their orbit. So what absolute wisdom requires is ending the show. Think of yourself as being a character in a movie, or a character in life, or a character on a stage. Does the concert go on forever? Most of the time? Not usually. Not if it's a good concert, because there's a certain amount of planning and architecture and form and energy that goes into playing a character in a role indefinitely. It's like a job almost. And so you're not gonna, imagine you're imagine you work in the legal profession. It's going to be very difficult for you to get an objective perspective about what it's like to live life outside of working in the legal profession if you're working in the legal profession. You don't have enough distance from that thing to see if you're operating in like a Sartrean bad faith kind of way. So Sartre had this famous example of the waitress. And the example was thinking of yourself as a waitress, right? See, that's an identity level statement that you're making about yourself. Like, I am a paralegal, or I am a waitress, or I am a nurse, or I am a professor. I'm a scientist. I'm a spiritual enlightenment teacher. I'm a consciousness teacher. I'm a teacher, right? I mean, I'm a helper. And it's very difficult to see how this identity level association that you're making how that keeps you locked in to something that is less than wisdom. So this isn't about hierarchy. It's not about losing truth, love, beauty. It's to help people feel this idea instead of reacting to it. I don't want this to be a reaction, right? I don't want this to be misunderstood. But basically, what I've noticed is that you're too attached to spiritual enlightenment. This is the thing you're not going to want to hear. And this is the only thing that can ultimately bring absolute wisdom. And this is what nobody wants to do. Well, people do it, but they quietly do it, right? They're not the people that are online. They're not the people making videos. Usually, they're not the people who are talking about it, not the people who are making money doing it. They're kind of hobbyists, I guess. I mean, think about it. Like if you're the difference between studying something on your own for fun versus that being your profession. So, for example, let's say that you do a little bit of web development on the side. So you can, you learn a little bit about HTML, you learn a little bit about CSS, you learn a little bit about JavaScript, maybe something else. Maybe you have a couple of websites that you've coded, but you're not a web developer. You're not living that, right? So you have enough distance from it in a way to be wiser than the person who's doing it for money, because their nose is to the grindstone. And when that happens to be spiritual enlightenment, you might think that that's a great thing. Oh, my nose is to the grindstone with regard to spiritual enlightenment, so that means that I'm going to be the best at spiritual enlightenment. Well, the problem is that spiritual enlightenment is not the same thing as other professions, first of all. Why? Because you're talking about spirituality, which can't be groupthink like science can, or like philosophy can, or like web development can inherently be groupthink. Spirituality, the only person who can have wisdom is you, right? The only person who can judge is you. So spirituality is inherently, people are going to disagree with me about this too. It's inherently personal. So the reason why absolute wisdom is necessary, and I'm going to take a break after I state this thesis, is because spirituality, it's almost like those Chinese finger traps where you stick your finger. I got this example from somebody online. She knows who she is, but it's a really good example. It's like those Chinese finger traps where you stick your fingers in, and the harder you try to pull your fingers out, the more they clamp down. You almost have to like pull your fingers out very slowly to release them from the trap. Well, it's very similar with spiritual enlightenment, and this is the reason why you need absolute wisdom, is because it's almost like the more you clamp down, the more you lose it. So that's my thesis with regard to this. Is why absolute wisdom is higher than absolute truth, absolute love, and absolute beauty, from my perspective in terms of creating this video. Okay, friends, so take that in, and then just give me 1 second. I'll come back and I'll give you some more details as to this. Just give me 1 second. Okay, friends, welcome back. So, yeah, it is a bit counterintuitive, because even though we all work on spiritual enlightenment, many of us for many years, including myself, you as well, we have to be careful sometimes about our character's association to spiritual enlightenment. Like, is this all we do? Like, have we made a profession out of this? Do we fashion ourselves to be some kind of a spiritual guru or spiritual teacher or something along those kinds of lines? Ultimately, that could lead you astray, is the point that I'm trying to make. And so what absolute wisdom does is it helps correct for this issue. And there's one way that this can actually be corrected for that is not terribly disturbing. In other words, like, you should still be able to be a guru. You should still be able to participate in your spiritual community, whether it's online, whether it's in person, whether it's, you're a life coach, you're a psychonaut, with the psychedelic substances, some people do that, whether you're a therapist of some kind. I'm not telling anybody that it's wrong for them to continue doing what they're doing. All I'm saying is, if we're talking about spiritual enlightenment, then it is very true that the more you clamp down on it, because of its very nature, there's going to be part of it that you lose sight of by doing that. So the more you focus on truth, the more you start seeing the false. The more you start focusing on love, the more you start seeing disagreement and corruption and immorality. The more you start focus on beauty, the more you are focused on ugliness, right? So it's almost like the harder you try to clamp down on spiritual enlightenment, it naturally builds up a kind of shadow behind you. Now, you may ask yourself, well, what's the solution to this? And it's actually remarkably simple. The solution is, you got to get away from it. You got to build some distance between you and spiritual enlightenment. And this is what a lot of people don't want to do, because, this is their community. This is their job in many cases. This is their hobby. This is their family. This is their source of entertainment even. And people, they want to do anything but do this. Notice that? Oh, if I can only read more books. Oh, if I can only do more psychedelics. Oh, if I can only talk to more people. Oh, if I can only debate spiritual enlightenment for the millionth time. Then, that's doing the work. I'm so hardcore, I'm doing all this work. Well, no, you're actually not hardcore enough, because if you were hardcore, you would step away from the work, and you would realize that that is doing the work when it's right to do that. This isn't for people that are like young on the path. This is more for like veterans who've been doing this stuff for like 10 years. And people do step away. I've noticed this. There's a lot of people on online forums. I don't see them around anymore. Like they disappeared. People that I, have had conversations with. I've disappeared too, here and there. People disappear. They do this naturally. So this idea of absolute wisdom for spiritual enlightenment, this idea of getting off the stage of spiritual performance, this is something that people do naturally. Because association overrides nuance. See, association alone or attachment alone, it carries consequences. So you're attached to an identity. It's like the Sartrean waitress. Like, I'm a waitress. I'm a spiritual teacher. That's an identity level statement. You need to break free from that. And the only way that you can break free from that is to get distance from it. It's like, imagine your job is a musician. Well, think of how hard it would be for you to detach from music. Your job as a musician. Or like my job as a life coach. How hard is it for me to detach from that? I'm also a litigation paralegal. So my attachment to the law, like how hard would it be for me to detach from the law? I work with law every single day. I work with life coaching every single day. Like, I work with spiritual enlightenment every single day. So you never think about that. Like, it's like, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, basically. So when you're attached to truth, you start seeing the world in terms of true versus false. When you're attached to love, you start seeing the world in terms of relation versus non-relation, or agreeable versus disagreeable, or morally virtuous versus morally corrupt, those kinds of things. If you're attached to beauty, you start seeing the world in terms of beauty and versus ugliness. It just is the way that it is, right? And so the way that you get your wisdom back, in a way, is going away for at least 30 days. And I'm talking about stop doing it. You know what I'm saying? Stop reading the spiritual stuff. Stop talking about spirituality. Like, you got to really get away from that attachment that you have to spiritual enlightenment. And the thing is that you'll find, because I've actually done this before, so I'm going to give you guys the answer. But in a way, I feel bad for telling you this, because it's like somebody trying to describe to you like a psychedelic trip or something like that. That's not the same thing, right? So, or like trying to describe to you what it's like to walk around the streets of London, or to somebody, trying to describe to you some kind of thing. It's just that secondhand, right? It's not going to be the same. But I want to give you guys one pointer, is that I've done this before, like where I've just gone away for a long time, like not just 30 days, but like 90 days, didn't read a single book, just lived my life, didn't think about spiritual enlightenment, didn't think about truth, didn't think about love, didn't think about beauty, didn't think about wisdom even. And what you'll discover when you do this, and I've said this before, it's actually really profound, is that, first of all, you can come back to it. You'll come back to it like reconciling with an old friend almost, or like an old relationship. You don't realize how attached you are to the social side of these things. But it's kind of like that. You can always come back to it. But what you'll find is you'll find what sticks with you. So outside of all the yammering, the debating, the reading, the blah, 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 the chest beating, the posturing, you're going to find out exactly what role spirituality actually plays in your life when you're not focused on it all the time. And that's going to cultivate absolute wisdom and spiritual enlightenment. You'll know that. And you can always go back to it. It's like a psychedelic trip that kind of revealed something to you. You can always think back to the trip, even though you don't even need to do the trip again. You did it like a long time ago, but it like had like some kind of revelatory thing to you because it was experiential. It was experiential. The same thing happens here when you get off the stage as a spiritual ego. You get off the stage of spiritual performance. You get off the path, actually. And you just go back to, you go do something else, anything else. It could be anything else. And don't try not to study spirituality. Pay attention to what you actually do read or think about. But at the same time, you do want to be mindful of that attachment or that craving that you have for spiritual performance. So, okay, friends, hopefully I was able to explain this in like a calm, kind of precise way that's non-defensive, not too provocative. And what I'm saying here, though, is that this is the one thing, it's like the one thing that you could do that nobody does, very few people do, on the spiritual enlightenment path because of this idea that the more I clamp down, it's like, trying to pull your finger, you got those finger cuffs on, you're trying to pull your fingers out real fast. You're trying to use force to solve a problem. But it's the gentle touch in spiritual enlightenment. Spiritual enlightenment is actually very different from every other subject because it's about spirituality. Spirituality cannot be groupthink. Everything else is groupthink. Spirituality cannot be groupthink because ultimately spirituality has to do with an individual inside, and that can only be determined by an individual. So all a guru could really be for you in spirituality is some kind of a guide for you to develop your own spirituality. But it doesn't work the same way, like, to become a great boxer, you want to box a lot, right? Like, how can you become a great boxer by getting away from boxing? So this is where spiritual enlightenment is a little bit paradoxical. Once you've spent a long time on spirituality, paradoxically, the way that you develop further is by getting away from it. Because it's only by getting away from it that you can actually see spiritual enlightenment for what it actually is. It's really hard to, it's like acting in a movie. Imagine you're an actor in a movie. It's really hard to watch the movie when you're acting in the movie. Right? Your perspective is as an actor in that movie. You don't see the movie in the way that somebody watching the movie would see it. So it's almost like you have to go, as an actor, this is an analogy. It would be like an actor saying, you know what I'm going to do for the next 6 months is I'm just going to watch movies. I'm not going to focus on acting at all. I'm just going to sit and I'm going to watch movies. And you will gain a perspective that you didn't have as an actor because you gave that up, right? And you didn't realize how much being an actor kept you from noticing acting for what it is. It's the same thing with spiritual enlightenment. You're so focused on being and doing spiritual enlightenment that you're not focused on how spiritual enlightenment actually factors into day-to-day life for you. And then that will help you ultimately become a better spiritual guide. Because by discovering that for yourself, you'll find better ways of pointing out and sharing truth, love, beauty, and even wisdom with those people that you come into contact with. Okay, friends? Hopefully this is a good video, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care.